That Sunday, I learned that silence can be louder than any scream, and that sometimes justice doesn't come from our own hands, it comes from the people who truly see us. My name is Claire Finnegan. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in this small town outside Dublin my entire life. I raised 3 children in a house that smelled of soda bread and turf fires. I buried my husband 5 years ago, and since then, Sunday dinners at my son Liam's house became my anchor. The one day I felt I still belonged to something. But that particular Sunday changed everything. I should tell you about the tablecloth first, because it matters. It was cream linen with delicate embroidered corners, wildflowers, the kind that grow along the stone walls near Connemara. My daughter-in-law, Siobhan, had bought it in a fancy shop in Galway. She'd mentioned it 3 times that morning. Italian linen, Claire. Cost a fortune. Please be careful. I was careful. I'm always careful. The table was set beautifully. Siobhan has a way of making everything look like a magazine spread. The good china, cloth napkins folded into swans, a centerpiece of white roses. My granddaughters, Eowif and Maeve, sat across from me, their faces glowing in the afternoon light. Liam poured the wine, a deep burgundy that caught the sun through the window. I remember thinking how blessed I was, how grateful. Even though Siobhan's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me, I told myself it didn't matter. Family was family. The roast lamb smelled divine. Siobhan does know how to cook, I'll give her that. We passed dishes around, roasted potatoes with rosemary, glazed carrots, mint sauce in my grandmother's silver boat. Everything felt warm, safe. Then Liam reached across to refill my glass. I don't know exactly how it happened. Maybe my hand trembled. It does that sometimes now. Maybe the glass was too full. But as I lifted it to my lips, a few drops spilled. Just a few. They bloomed across that cream linen like blood in water. A small dark stain spreading slowly near my plate. I froze. "Oh no," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Before I could reach for my napkin, Siobhan's chair scraped back. She shot up, her face flushed red, her eyes wild with something I'd never seen before. Not just anger, but contempt. "For God's sake, Claire!" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the room like glass breaking. "Look what you've done! That tablecloth was brand new!" "I'll pay for the cleaning," I said quickly, my heart hammering. "Or I'll replace it, I promise." But she wasn't listening. She moved toward me, and before I understood what was happening, her hands were on my shoulders. She shoved me, hard. I stumbled backward, catching myself on the edge of the sideboard. Pain shot through my hip, the one that's been bothering me since the fall last winter. The room tilted. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Velha desastrada!" The words came out in a hiss, half English, half something else, something cruel. "Clumsy old woman, look what you've done! You ruin everything!" The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my son, at my granddaughters, at the faces around that table. No one moved. No one spoke. Weef's eyes were wide, frightened. Maeve stared down at her plate. Liam sat frozen, his hand still holding the wine bottle, his mouth slightly open. And in that moment, I felt something inside me crack. Not my body, my heart, the kind of break that doesn't heal quickly. I straightened slowly, my hip throbbing. I smoothed down my cardigan with trembling hands. I wanted to say something dignified, something strong, but all I could manage was, "I think I should go." Still, no one spoke. I gathered my handbag from the chair, my keys, my coat from the hook in the hallway. Behind me, I heard Siobhan muttering in Portuguese to Liam, words I couldn't understand but whose tone I knew perfectly well. I walked out into the cool October air and closed the door behind me. But that night, something happened that changed everything. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever been hurt by someone you tried so hard to love? Tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. I don't remember much about the drive home. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The road blurred, not from tears, though they came later, but from shock, from the crushing weight of humiliation. I've lived 63 years on this earth. I've buried parents, a husband, a stillborn daughter whose name I still whisper in my prayers. I've survived poverty, loneliness, and the long, dark winters when the wind off the Atlantic felt like it could strip the flesh from your bones. But I had never been treated like that. Like I was nothing. Like I was a burden too heavy to bear. The house was cold when I got home. I'd left early that morning, excited about the dinner, so I hadn't bothered with the heating. Now the silence felt oppressive. I stood in the hallway, still wearing my coat, staring at the photograph on the wall, the one of Liam's first communion. He's 7 in that picture, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a prayer book. I'd made his suit myself, sitting up late into the night with my mother's old Singer sewing machine. That little boy had loved me fiercely, completely. Where had he gone? I made myself a cup of tea, strong the way my mother taught me, and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd fed Liam porridge before school, where I'd helped him with his homework, where I'd held him when his father died, both of us crying into the dark. The phone rang 3 times that evening. I didn't answer. I knew it was Liam. Part of me wanted to hear his voice, wanted him to say the words I needed. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I should have said something. I should have protected you." But another part of me, the part that had been shoved and called names in front of my granddaughters, that part couldn't bear to hear excuses, couldn't bear to hear him defend her. So I let it ring. I went to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in the dark, replaying the scene over and over. Siobhan's face, twisted with anger, the sound of her voice, the feel of her hands on my shoulders, and worst of all, the silence, the terrible, complicit silence of everyone at that table. Had I imagined being loved? Had I been fooling myself all these years? By Monday morning, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't go back, not to Sunday dinners, not to birthday parties, not to anything. I'd keep my distance, save my dignity, and let them live their perfect lives without the clumsy old woman who ruined Italian tablecloths. I watered my plants. I cleaned the kitchen that didn't need cleaning. I rearranged the china cabinet. Anything to keep my hands busy, to keep my mind from spiraling into that dark place where grief lives. It was around 2 in the afternoon when I heard the car in the driveway. My stomach dropped. I knew that engine sound. Liam's old Volvo, the one he refused to replace because it had been his father's. I thought about not answering the door, about pretending I wasn't home, but I'm not built that way. I've never hidden from hard things. I opened the door. Liam stood on the step, and the look on his face nearly broke me. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair uncombed. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked past me into the sitting room, the room where I'd rocked him as a baby, where we'd watched the toy show every Christmas Eve, where his father had taught him to play chess on rainy Sundays. He didn't sit down. He stood by the fireplace, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, staring at the floor. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air between us. They should have been enough. They should have made everything better. But they weren't, and they didn't. "You didn't say anything," I said quietly. "You sat there and watched her push me. Watched her call me names, and you said nothing, Liam." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "I know, ma'am. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." I waited. There had to be more. There had to be some explanation that made sense of the senseless. "She's under a lot of pressure," he began, and I felt my heart sink. "The girls are struggling in school, and she's been working double shifts at the hospital and—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Don't do that. Don't make excuses for cruelty, Liam. I raised you better than that." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Recognition. Shame. "You're right," he said. "You did raise me better." We stood in silence for a moment. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Murphy's dog barking, the everyday sounds of a world that kept turning regardless of personal tragedies. "What happened after I left?" I asked. I didn't really want to know, but I needed to. Liam's jaw tightened. "We need to talk about that, ma'am. Because something happened at that table after you walked out. Something Siobhan didn't expect. As I tell you this, I wonder where you're listening from. Write your city below, so I can feel a little closer to you." Liam walked to the window, his back to me. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking out at the garden where he used to play as a boy. The apple tree his father planted was bare now. its branches dark against the gray October sky. "After you left," he said slowly, "nobody moved for maybe 30 seconds. It felt longer. Our wife was crying, quiet tears, the kind she does when she's scared. Maeve just stared at the stain on the tablecloth like it was the most interesting thing in the world." He turned to face me then, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Steel. The same determination his father had when he stood up for what was right, even when it cost him. "Siobhan started clearing the plates," he continued, acting like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just assaulted my mother in front of my children. She was humming, ma'am, humming some song under her breath like it was just another Sunday. My chest tightened. The casual cruelty of it, the dismissal. "I kept thinking about Dad," Liam said, his voice rough, "about what he would have done if he'd been sitting in that chair. And I knew I'd failed you, failed him, failed my own daughters by showing them that this was acceptable." He moved back to the center of the room, standing near the sofa where we'd sat through so many difficult conversations over the years. When he told me he was moving to Dublin for university, when he called to say he'd met someone, when he came home to help me plan his father's funeral. "So I stood up," he said. "I picked up my wine glass. Everyone looked at me. Siobhan stopped humming. The whole room went quiet again. But this time it was different. This time the silence was mine. I held my breath, waiting. I raised the glass," Liam continued, "and I looked directly at Siobhan. And I said 5 words, ma'am. Just 5 words." "What did you say?" My voice came out as a whisper. Liam met my eyes. "That was my mother, Siobhan." The simplicity of it struck me like a blow. No shouting, no elaborate speech. Just 5 words that carried the weight of everything. History, loyalty, love, and a line drawn in the sand. "She laughed at first," Liam said. "That nervous laugh she does when she's uncomfortable. She said something like, 'I know that, obviously.' But I didn't sit down. I just stood there holding that glass, looking at her. And I said it again, slower this time. 'That was my mother.'" I could picture it so clearly. My son, standing at his own table, finally finding his voice. "I've asked if you were coming back," he continued. And before I could answer, Siobhan snapped at her. Told her to finish her dinner and stop being dramatic. That's when I set the glass down. He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I told the girls to go upstairs. They didn't argue. They practically ran. Then I turned to Siobhan and I said, 'You will apologize to my mother. You will do it sincerely, and you will do it soon. Because what happened here today is unforgivable.'" My hands were shaking. I folded them in my lap, trying to steady myself. "She tried to turn it around," Liam said, his voice tight with anger. "Said I was being unreasonable, that it was just an accident, that she'd been stressed, that your generation doesn't understand how hard it is to manage a household and a career. She threw every excuse at me like I was supposed to catch them and hand her absolution. What did you do?" I told her the truth. He sat down finally, on the edge of the armchair across from me. I said, "My mother raised me alone after Dad died. She worked 2 jobs to keep me in school. She sold her wedding ring to pay for my university books. She has never, not once in my entire life, asked me for anything except to be treated with basic human decency. And you couldn't even give her that." Tears were streaming down my face now. I didn't bother wiping them away. "Then I told her something else," Liam said, leaning forward. "I told her that if she ever spoke to you like that again, or touched you in anger, she would be the one who wasn't welcome at Sunday dinners. Not you, her." The room felt smaller suddenly, charged with something I couldn't quite name. Not just vindication, though there was that. Something deeper, the restoration of order, of justice. "She went white," Liam continued, started crying. "Said I was choosing you over her, that I didn't understand her perspective, that she'd had a difficult childhood and didn't know how to control her temper sometimes." "And what did you say to that?" I asked. Liam's eyes hardened. I said, "Then get help. But you don't get to take your pain out on people who've done nothing but love you." I told her she had 1 week to come here, face you, and apologize properly. If she didn't, there would be consequences. I absorbed this slowly, letting it settle into the broken places inside me. "She's terrified, ma'am," Liam said quietly. "I've never seen her like this. Last night she couldn't sleep. This morning she barely spoke. I think for the first time in our marriage, She realizes I'm serious, that there are lines she can't cross. He reached across and took my hand, his grip warm and strong, the same hand I'd held when he learned to walk, when he fell off his bicycle, when we stood together at his father's grave. I should have said something at the table, he said, his voice breaking. Right when it happened, I should have stood up immediately. I'll carry that shame with me, ma'am, but I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it for as long as I need to. I squeezed his hand. You found your voice when it mattered most. That's what counts. We sat like that for a while, mother and son, in the quiet house that had witnessed so much of our lives. Outside, the light was fading. Soon it would be dark, and the world would settle into evening. But something had shifted. Something had been set right. Though I didn't know it yet, the real reckoning was still to come. I still wonder what I would have done if I'd been Liam. Sometimes the hardest thing is standing up to the people we love. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and justice? The week that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if I'd fall or fly. Liam called me every day, sometimes twice. He'd ask how I was sleeping, if I'd eaten, if I needed anything from the shops. It reminded me of the months after his father died, when he'd check on me constantly, terrified I'd disappear into grief and never come back. But this was different. This time, he wasn't just worried about my well-being. He was watching the clock, waiting to see if Siobhan would do the right thing. She hasn't said much, he told me on Wednesday evening. She goes through the motions, makes dinner, helps the girls with homework, gets ready for work. But it's like she's somewhere else, like she's trying to figure out how this happened. I understood that feeling. I'd spent the better part of 40 years married to a good man, learning that pride and love can't occupy the same space. One of them always has to yield. The question was, which one would Siobhan choose? I filled my days the way I always had when trouble came knocking. I baked brown bread and apple tarts. I cleaned windows that were already clean. I walked down to the harbor and watched the fishing boats come in, their nets heavy with the day's catch. The smell of salt and seaweed reminded me that the world was bigger than my small hurt, that tides rose and fell regardless of human drama. Mrs. Murphy from next door stopped by on Thursday with a tin of biscuits and that particular expression that meant she'd heard something. I ran into young Awif at the library, she said, settling into my kitchen chair with practiced ease. Sweet child. She seemed upset, though. Asked me if I thought people could really change. I poured the tea, waiting. I told her, yes, of course they can, but they have to want to. Mrs. Murphy gave me a meaningful look over her cup. She said her mam's been crying a lot, that her da's been sleeping in the spare room. The information landed heavily. I didn't take pleasure in it. I'm not built that way. But I didn't feel guilty either. Actions have consequences. That's not cruelty. That's just truth. The child asked me something else, Mrs. Murphy continued. She asked if I thought you'd ever come back for Sunday dinner. What did you tell her? I told her that depended entirely on whether certain people remembered their manners. She bit into a biscuit. I may have also mentioned that you're the best grandmother those girls could ask for, and anyone who doesn't see that is a fool. God bless Mrs. Murphy. She's been my neighbor for 37 years, and she's never been one for diplomatic silence. Friday came and went. Then Saturday. I tried not to watch the clock, but I couldn't help calculating. 1 week, Liam had said. 7 days. By Sunday morning, that deadline would arrive. I slept poorly on Saturday night. I kept dreaming about the tablecloth, that spreading wine stain growing larger and larger until it covered everything. The whole table, the whole room, swallowing all of us in dark red. I woke, gasping at 3 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep. I made myself tea and sat in the dark kitchen, thinking about forgiveness, about what it means and what it costs. My mother used to say that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let bitterness poison your own well. But she also said that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting abuse. There's a difference between mercy and martyrdom. Sunday morning dawned gray and soft, the kind of day where the clouds sit low and the rain holds off but threatens constantly. I went to Mass at St. Bridget's, same as I have every Sunday for 63 years. Father Brennan gave a homily about the prodigal son, and I wondered if God had a sense of humor about timing. After Mass, I walked home slowly, nodding to familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries about the weather and Mrs. Devlin's new hip. Normal life, continuing on. The world doesn't stop for personal earthquakes. I'd just put the kettle on when I heard the car. My heart jumped into my throat. I moved to the window and looked out. Liam's Volvo sat in the driveway, but he wasn't alone. In the passenger seat, I could see Siobhan. She was staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale and drawn. They sat there for a full minute. I watched them through the lace curtain. Liam saying something, Siobhan shaking her head, then nodding, then wiping her eyes. Finally, they both opened their doors. I stepped back from the window, my pulse racing. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. I smoothed down my cardigan, the same one I'd been wearing that terrible Sunday, and went to open the door before they could knock. Liam looked exhausted. Siobhan looked worse. Her eyes were swollen, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore no makeup, which was unusual for her. She always took pride in her appearance, in presenting a polished face to the world. "Ma'am," Liam said quietly, "Siobhan has something she'd like to say to you." Siobhan's hands were trembling. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Mrs. Finnegan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Claire, But before she could finish, something unexpected happened. Her face crumpled completely, and she began to sob. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and broken inside her. I stood there, frozen. Part of me wanted to close the door, to say it was too late, that tears didn't undo violence. But another part of me, the part that had raised 3 children and buried too many loved ones, that part recognized the sound of genuine anguish. Liam put his hand on Siobhan's shoulder, but he looked at me, waiting, leaving the decision in my hands where it belonged. I thought about my mother, about my grandmother, about all the women who'd taught me that strength isn't always hard, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave a door open when you have every right to slam it shut. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "Both of you, come in." As I tell you this, I find myself wondering, when someone hurts us deeply, how do we know if their remorse is real? Have you ever had to make that choice? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We sat in the same sitting room where Liam and I had talked days before, the same room where I'd raised my children, where I'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays, where I'd sat alone after my husband's funeral and wondered how I'd survive. Now it held 3 of us, and a truth that needed speaking. I made tea. Not because anyone asked for it, but because that's what Irish women do when the world falls apart. We boil water. We pour tea. We create small rituals of normalcy while everything else crumbles. Siobhan sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands wrapped around the cup I'd given her, the one with the blue cornflowers, part of the set my mother had left me. She hadn't taken a single sip. She just held it like it was anchoring her to something solid. Liam sat beside her, but not touching. There was space between them, a gap that spoke volumes. I took my usual chair, the one by the fireplace. My chair, where I'd sat and watched my children grow, where I'd knitted tiny sweaters for my grandchildren, where I'd learned to be alone after 42 years of marriage. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, I could hear children playing in the street, someone's grandchildren visiting, their laughter carrying on the wind. Siobhan finally looked up at me. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face stripped of all pretense. She looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. "I don't know where to start," she said, her accent thicker than usual, the Portuguese influence more pronounced when she was emotional. "I've been sitting in the car trying to find the right words, but there aren't any. There's nothing I can say that will make what I did acceptable." I waited. I'd learned long ago that silence is sometimes the most powerful response. "I was raised to be strong," she continued, her voice shaking. "My mother, she came from nothing in Brazil. She worked herself to the bone to give us a better life. She used to say, 'Never show weakness. Never let anyone see you vulnerable. The world will eat you alive.' I grew up believing that. I grew up thinking that showing emotion was failure." She set the teacup down on the side table, carefully, as if afraid she might drop it. "When I came to Ireland, I was terrified," she said. "I was 23 years old, barely spoke English, working night shifts at the hospital, trying to prove I belonged here, trying to prove I was enough. And then I met Liam. She glanced at my son, and something passed between them, something complicated and painful. He was so kind, she whispered, so gentle. Everything my mother told me to avoid because gentle men were weak men. But I loved him. I loved him so much it scared me. I understood that feeling. I'd loved my husband the same way, with a ferocity that felt dangerous. When we got married, Siobhan continued, I wanted to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law. I wanted you to be proud of me, to think Liam had made a good choice. But I always felt like I was failing, like I wasn't measuring up. Her voice cracked. You were everything I wasn't, Claire. You were calm and patient and wise. The girls adored you. Liam adored you. And I felt like I was always competing with a ghost, with the memory of your perfect marriage, your perfect life. I know that sounds ridiculous. I know it was in my head, but it felt real to me. I started to speak, but she held up her hand. Please, she said, let me finish. I need to say this. I nodded. That's Sunday, she said, the words coming faster now. I'd been awake since 4 a.m. I'd worked a double shift on Saturday, came home to find the girls hadn't done their homework, the house was a mess, and I still had to prepare dinner for 5 people. I was exhausted, but that's not an excuse. There is no excuse. She looked directly at me now, tears streaming down her face. I bought that tablecloth because I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to prove that I could do it all. Work, mother, wife, hostess. And when the wine spilled, something in me just broke. All I could see was the stain, the imperfection, the failure. And I lashed out at you because you were safe. Because I thought I knew, that Liam would let me. That family would forgive anything. The room was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. But I was wrong, she whispered. I was so wrong. When Liam stood up and said those 5 words, that was my mother, Siobhan. I felt like I'd been slapped awake. I saw myself clearly for the first time. I saw what I'd become. Someone who hurt people. Someone who pushed an elderly woman because of a wine stain. Someone who'd lost all sense of proportion and decency. She covered her face with her hands. I haven't slept in a week, she said through her fingers. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face. The shock, the pain, the humiliation. I did that to you. I put that look on your face, and I can't live with that, Claire. I can't live with being that person. She dropped her hands and looked at me with such raw desperation that it hurt to witness. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm asking you to believe me when I say I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I am ashamed of what I did. And if I could take it back, if I could undo that moment, I would give anything, anything. The silence stretched between us. Liam sat perfectly still, watching both of us, barely breathing. I thought about my mother again, about the lessons she'd taught me, not with words, but with her life. She'd been wronged by people she loved. She'd been hurt deeply. But she'd always found a way to separate the person from the action, to see the humanity, even in the worst behavior. Tell me something, Siobhan, I said quietly. When you pushed me in that moment, did you see me as a person, or just as an obstacle? She flinched as if I'd struck her. I didn't see you at all, she whispered. That's the truth. I saw the stain. I saw my failure. I saw everything I was afraid of. But I didn't see you. And that's what haunts me most. I stood up slowly, my hips still aching from where I'd caught myself against the sideboard. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The roses were dying back now, preparing for winter. Everything has its season. My husband used to say, I began, still looking out the window, that the measure of a person isn't in their worst moment. It's in what they do afterward, whether they run from the truth or face it. I turned to look at Siobhan. You're here, I said simply. You're facing it. That matters. Hope flickered in her eyes, fragile and uncertain. But I need you to understand something, I continued, moving back to my chair. An apology isn't magic. It doesn't erase what happened. Trust is like china. Once it breaks, you can glue it back together, but you'll always see the cracks. I know, she whispered. I know. I'm willing to try, I said, to see if we can mend this, but it will take time. And it will require you to do the work, not just say the words, but change the behavior. Can you do that? Siobhan nodded, tears flowing freely now. Yes, I swear to you, Claire, I will do whatever it takes. I looked at Liam. His eyes were wet, his jaw tight with emotion. Your father would be proud of you, I told him, for finding your voice, for standing up. That took courage. I should have done it sooner, he said hoarsely. You did it when it mattered, I replied. That's what counts. I turned back to Siobhan. I accept your apology, but we start fresh from here. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending. If something's wrong, we talk about it, like family should. She stood up shakily and took a step toward me, uncertain. I opened my arms, and she fell into them, sobbing like a child. I held her the way I'd held my own children through their worst moments, firmly, with love, but without illusions. It's all right, I murmured. We'll find our way through this. But even as I said it, I didn't know that the hardest part was still ahead. That forgiveness is just the beginning, not the end. That life has a way of testing our promises when we least expect it. What would you have done in my place? Sometimes forgiveness feels impossible, and sometimes it's the only path forward. Tell me, have you ever had to forgive the unforgivable? 3 months passed. Autumn gave way to winter, and the world turned cold and gray the way it does in Ireland when the year begins to die. Siobhan kept her word. She came to visit every Thursday afternoon. Just the two of us, no Liam, no children. At first, the conversations were awkward, stilted. We talked about safe things, the weather, recipes, her shifts at the hospital. But gradually, slowly, something began to shift. She told me about her childhood in São Paulo, about her mother's iron will and impossible standards, about growing up feeling like she was never quite enough, never quite right. I told her about my own mother, about the weight of expectations and the fear of disappointing the people we love most. We weren't friends exactly, but we were finding something, an understanding maybe, a fragile bridge built from honesty and effort. Sunday dinners resumed in November. The first one was tense. Everyone too careful, too polite, like we were strangers learning how to behave in each other's company. But Aof and Maeve were so happy to have me back that their joy broke through the awkwardness. Children have a way of healing things that adults complicate. Siobhan bought a new tablecloth, simple cotton, nothing fancy. The wine-stained linen had gone to the charity shop, she told me. She didn't want to see it anymore. Some things are better let go, she'd said. And I'd nodded, understanding that she wasn't just talking about fabric. Christmas came. We celebrated at my house that year, my suggestion, and to my surprise, Siobhan agreed immediately. She helped me cook, and we moved around my small kitchen with increasing ease, her chopping vegetables while I rolled pastry, our rhythms gradually synchronizing. Liam watched us from the doorway at one point, and when I caught his eye, he smiled. A real smile, the kind that reaches all the way to the soul. Dad would have liked this, he said quietly. And he was right. My husband had always believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. But life, I've learned, has a way of testing our convictions when we least expect it. It was late January when everything changed again. The coldest week of winter, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and won't let go. I'd caught a chest infection, nothing serious, but enough to keep me in bed for a few days. Liam called every morning. Siobhan sent soup. The girls made get-well cards that Mrs. Murphy delivered. I felt cared for, loved. On the 4th day of my illness, there was a knock at the door around 2 in the afternoon. I was feeling better, finally up and dressed, but still weak. I assumed it was Mrs. Murphy again, checking on me. It was Siobhan, alone, and the look on her face told me immediately that something was wrong. "Claire," she said, her voice tight. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." My stomach dropped. That tone, I knew it. It was the sound of catastrophe arriving. We sat in the sitting room, the familiar space that had witnessed so much of our slow reconciliation. But this time, the air felt different, charged, dangerous. "What's happened?" I asked. Siobhan's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, trying to still them. "Liam doesn't know I'm here," she began. "I left the hospital early. I told him I was working late, but I needed to see you first, before he finds out." My heart was racing now. Finds out what? She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Last night I got a call from Brazil. My mother is dying. Cancer. They say she has maybe 2 weeks, maybe less. She wants me to come home, to say goodbye." I felt a rush of sympathy. "Siobhan, I'm so sorry." "Wait," she interrupted. "There's more. The tickets. To fly there with the girls, to stay for the funeral and settle her affairs. It's going to cost nearly 8,000 euros. We don't have that kind of money. We've been saving for a house deposit, but it's not enough. We're short by about 3,000. I waited, not understanding yet why she looked so stricken. "Liam suggested we ask you for a loan," she said, and my blood ran cold. "He said you have some savings from selling Dad's car and the insurance payout. He said you'd want to help." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the armrest of my chair. "And what did you say?" I asked carefully. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I told him no. I told him we couldn't ask you. That after everything I've done, after how I treated you, I had no right to ask you for anything, let alone money. She covered her face with her hands. "But then he got angry with me," she continued, her voice muffled. "He said I was being ridiculous, that your family, that family helps family, that I was letting pride stand in the way of saying goodbye to my mother. And maybe he's right. Maybe I am being ridiculous. But Claire," she looked up at me, her face ravaged. "I can't ask you for money. I can't. It makes me sick even thinking about it. It feels like I'm using you. Like everything we've built these past months was just so I could get something from you when I needed it." The silence that fell between us was profound. I thought about the 8,000 euros she'd mentioned. I did have savings. More than that, actually. My husband had left me well provided for, and I lived simply. I didn't need much. The money sat in the bank, accumulating interest, waiting for some purpose. I thought about Siobhan's mother, dying in Brazil. About daughters and mothers and all the complicated love that binds them. About deathbeds and last words, and the regrets that haunt us when we don't get to say goodbye. I thought about the woman who'd pushed me 3 months ago, and the woman sitting in front of me now, crying because she refused to take advantage of my forgiveness. And I thought about what my husband would have done, what my mother would have done, what the right thing was, not the easy thing, but the right thing. "Siobhan," I said quietly, "look at me." She raised her tear-stained face. "I'm going to give you the money," I said. "Not as a loan, as a gift, for the tickets, for whatever you need." "No," she said immediately, shaking her head violently. "No, Claire, I can't." "Let me finish," I said firmly. "I'm giving you this money because it's the right thing to do, because your mother is dying and you need to be there. Because my quarrel was never with her, and she deserves to see her daughter one last time. Do you understand? But this isn't about what happened at that dinner," I continued. "This isn't about forgiveness or debt or any of that. This is about humanity. About doing for you what I would hope someone would do for my own children if I were dying half a world away." Siobhan was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "But I don't deserve this," she choked out. "I don't deserve your kindness, Claire. I pushed you. I hurt you. Stop," I said gently. "You're right. You don't deserve it. None of us deserve the grace we're given. But that's what makes it grace." I stood up, wincing as my hip protested, and went to my desk in the corner. I kept my checkbook there, in the same drawer where I kept my husband's watch and my children's baby photographs. I wrote out the check, 8,000 euros, to be safe. Enough for the tickets, and then some. I folded it carefully and brought it back to where Siobhan sat, frozen in disbelief. "Take it," I said, pressing it into her hand. "Go to Brazil. Be with your mother. Tell her you love her. Say everything you need to say. And don't worry about anything else." She stared at the check, then at me, then back at the check. "I'll pay you back," she whispered. "Every cent. I swear to you, Claire, I'll pay you back." "If you want to," I said. "When you can. But there's no rush, and there's no obligation. This is a gift, Siobhan. Accept it as such." She stood up suddenly and threw her arms around me, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. She was trembling all over, and I held her as she cried, for her dying mother, for the fear and relief, for the impossible burden of being forgiven when you can't forgive yourself. "Thank you," she whispered against my shoulder. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." When she finally pulled away, her face was blotchy and swollen, but something had changed in her eyes. Something fundamental had shifted. "I won't forget this," she said. "For as long as I live, Claire, I will never forget what you did for me today." "I know," I said simply. "Now go home. Tell Liam. Make your arrangements. And give your mother my love." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet house, feeling strangely light. The money was gone, yes, but it was only money. And I'd traded it for something more valuable, the certainty that I'd done the right thing, that I'd chosen love over bitterness, generosity over grudges. My husband would have been proud, but what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this act of grace would come full circle in a way I never expected, that sometimes what we give away comes back to us transformed. I still wonder if I did the right thing. Some people say I was too generous, that she didn't deserve it. What about you? When someone who's hurt you needs help, do you give it? Or do you walk away? Siobhan left for Brazil 3 days later. Liam drove her and the girls to the airport at dawn, and then came to my house for breakfast afterward. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. "She told me what you did," he said, sitting at my kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "About the money." "It was the right thing to do," I said simply. "Ma'am, 8,000 euros is just money, Liam. Your father and I worked hard all our lives so that when it mattered, we'd have something to give. This matters." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his tea. "She cried all night," he said finally. "Not about her mother. Well, yes, about that too. But about you, about what you did for her. She kept saying, 'I don't deserve this. I don't deserve her,' over and over again. 'None of us deserve the grace we're given,' I repeated. 'We just receive it and try to do better.'" He looked up at me then, his eyes, so like his father's, filled with emotion. "You're a better person than I am," he said quietly. "No," I corrected him gently. "I'm just older. I've had more time to learn that holding on to anger hurts us more than it hurts anyone else." Siobhan was gone for 2 weeks. Her mother died 4 days after she arrived. Peacefully, Liam told me, with her daughter holding her hand. They stayed for the funeral, for the settling of affairs, for the slow, painful work of saying goodbye to a life. When they returned in mid-February, Siobhan looked different, older somehow, quieter, the kind of change that comes from staring directly at mortality and understanding, finally, what matters and what doesn't. She came to see me the day after she got back. She brought photographs, her mother as a young woman, beautiful and fierce, her mother in later years, softened by illness, but still determined, her mother on her deathbed, at peace at last. "She asked about you," Siobhan said, her voice still hoarse from crying. "At the end, when she could barely speak, she asked me to tell you thank you. She said any woman who could forgive the way you did must have been raised by angels." My eyes filled with tears. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was impossible," Siobhan said with a sad smile. "Demanding, critical, never satisfied. But she loved us fiercely. And I understand now. I understand that she was trying to prepare us for a hard world. She just didn't know there was another way." We sat together in my sitting room, looking through the photographs, and Siobhan told me stories about her childhood, about poverty and struggle and the kind of strength born from desperation. And I saw, perhaps for the first time, the whole picture of who she was and how she'd become that way. March came, then April. Spring arrived slowly, the way it does in Ireland, tentative at first, then suddenly everywhere, the world exploding into green and gold. The apple tree in my garden bloomed, and I thought about my husband, about how he'd love this time of year. Sunday dinners had become easy again, comfortable. The girls were doing better in school. Liam had been promoted at work. Siobhan was seeing a therapist, her choice, not something anyone demanded, to work through her anger and her grief. Things were good, better than good. And then one Sunday in late April, everything came full circle in a way I never could have anticipated. We were just finishing dessert, my apple tart served with fresh cream, when Siobhan stood up. She was nervous, I could tell. Her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up her wine glass and cleared her throat. "I'd like to say something," she announced. The table went quiet. Liam looked at her with curiosity. The girls stopped giggling over some private joke. 6 months ago, Siobhan began, her voice wavering, I did something unforgivable. I hurt someone who had never been anything but kind to me. I pushed Claire, called her names, treated her like she was nothing, like she didn't matter. Wife and Maeve looked uncomfortable. They remembered that day, even though we'd never spoken of it directly in front of them. And Claire had every right to never forgive me, Siobhan continued. Every right to walk away and never come back. But she didn't. She gave me a second chance. More than that, when my mother was dying, when I needed help desperately but was too ashamed to ask for it, she gave me 8,000 euros. Just gave it to me, with no conditions, no expectations. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I told her I'd pay her back, and I've been saving every penny I could, working extra shifts, selling things we didn't need, because I needed to prove to her and to myself that I'm not the person I was that terrible Sunday. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. She walked around the table and placed it in front of me. That's 8,000 euros, she said. Every cent you gave me, paid back in full. I stared at the envelope, stunned. Siobhan, I told you. I know what you told me, she interrupted gently. That it was a gift, that I didn't have to pay it back. But I needed to. Not because of obligation, but because of gratitude. Because you taught me something more valuable than money, Claire. You taught me what real grace looks like. She knelt down beside my chair, taking my hand in both of hers. But there's something else in that envelope, she said. Something more important than money. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was the cash, yes, neatly bound in 50-euro notes, but there was also a piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. It was a deed, a property deed. What is this? I whispered. It's the cottage, Siobhan said. The one down by the harbor. The one you told me about months ago. The one you'd always dreamed of buying when your husband was alive. The one that went up for sale last month. My heart stopped. That cottage, a small stone place with a view of the water, surrounded by wild roses. My husband and I used to walk past it every Sunday evening, talking about how someday, when we retired, we'd buy it. We'd watch the boats come in from our own garden. We'd grow old there together, but he'd died before we could make it happen, and I'd let the dream die with him. We can't afford this, I said, my voice breaking. Liam, you were saving for a house. We used the money we'd saved, Liam said quietly. All of it, and Siobhan's entire inheritance from her mother. Every penny. We bought it together, ma'am. For you. But why? I could barely speak through my tears. Why would you do this? Siobhan squeezed my hand. Because you gave me back my mother. Those 2 weeks I had with her before she died. I got to say everything I needed to say. I got to tell her I loved her. I got to hold her hand while she took her last breath. You gave me that gift, Claire. This cottage is nothing compared to that. Also, Liam added, his own eyes wet, you've been living in this house alone for 5 years, ma'am. It's too big for you, too full of memories. You need somewhere new, somewhere that's yours, somewhere you can start fresh. I looked around at their faces, at my son, so much like his father, at my daughter-in-law, transformed by grief and grace into someone I was beginning to truly love, at my granddaughters, watching with wide eyes as their grandmother fell apart. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Say you'll take it, Siobhan said. Say you'll let us give you this one thing, after everything you've given us. I thought about the woman who had pushed me 6 months ago, about the wine stain and the cruel words and the silence that had followed. I thought about the long journey from that moment to this one, the apologies and the tears and the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust. I thought about my husband and how he'd always believed in second chances, how he'd always said that people could change if they wanted to badly enough. And I thought about grace, how it works in mysterious ways, how what we give away somehow finds its way back to us, transformed into something more beautiful than we could have imagined. Yes, I said, crying now. Yes, I'll take it. Thank you. Thank you. Siobhan pulled me into her arms, and we held each other. 2 women who had traveled from hatred to understanding, from hurt to healing. Around us, my family gathered close, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete, whole, home. But even as I celebrated this unexpected gift, I couldn't help thinking about the strange mathematics of karma, how the universe keeps its own accounts, how what goes around truly does come around. Because 3 months later, something happened that proved the circle wasn't quite complete yet. Looking back now, I can see how everything connected, how one act of cruelty led to a moment of grace that changed all our lives. Have you ever experienced karma in your own life? The way life balances its own scales? I moved into the cottage at the end of May, when the wild roses were just beginning to bloom. The moving day was chaos. Liam and Siobhan and the girls all helping, boxes everywhere, Mrs. Murphy supervising from the doorway with a running commentary on how things should be arranged. But when everyone finally left and I stood alone in my new sitting room, looking out at the harbor through windows that smelled of fresh paint, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my husband died. Peace. The cottage was small, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a sitting room with a stone fireplace. But it was mine, not filled with memories of the past, but waiting to be filled with whatever came next. I spent the first week settling in, learning the rhythms of my new life. The morning sounds of gulls and fishing boats, the evening light on the water, the neighbors who waved as they walked their dogs past my garden gate. And every Sunday, without fail, my family came for dinner. But something had shifted. Now Siobhan and I cooked together in my small kitchen, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of women who'd been through fire together and survived. Liam would sit at my little table with the girls, helping with homework or just talking. Normal things, family things. One Sunday in August, after everyone had left, I was washing dishes at the sink when I saw Siobhan's car pull back into the driveway. She came to the door alone, her face troubled. "I forgot my phone," she said, but I knew that wasn't why she'd returned. "What's really wrong?" I asked, drying my hands on a tea towel. She hesitated, then said, "Can I ask you something? About forgiveness?" We sat in my garden, on the bench Liam had built for me, watching the evening light fade over the water. "There's a woman at the hospital," Siobhan began. "One of the other nurses. She's been making my life miserable for months, spreading gossip, undermining me with patience, making me look incompetent. Last week she reported me to our supervisor for something I didn't do. I almost lost my job, Claire." Her hands were clenched in her lap. "I'm so angry," she continued. "I want to retaliate. I want to make her feel what she's made me feel. I have information about her, things that could damage her career, and part of me wants to use it, wants to hurt her the way she's hurt me." She turned to look at me, her eyes desperate. "But then I think about you, about what you did for me when I deserved nothing but your anger, and I don't know what to do. How did you do it, Claire? How did you forgive me when I treated you so badly?" I was quiet for a moment, watching a fishing boat make its way into harbor, its wake catching the last of the sun. "I'll tell you the truth," I said finally. "Forgiving you wasn't one decision. It was 100 small decisions made over and over again. Every time I thought about that Sunday dinner, every time the memory hurt, I had to choose. Hold on to the anger or let it go. Choose bitterness or choose peace." A gull cried overhead, its call echoing across the water. "But here's what I learned," I continued. "Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you. When I held on to my anger at you, it poisoned me. It made me bitter and small and afraid. But when I let it go, when I chose to see you as a whole person, not just the worst thing you'd ever done, I got my life back." "But she doesn't deserve forgiveness," Siobhan protested. "She hasn't apologized. She hasn't changed. She's still trying to destroy me." "You're right," I said. "She doesn't deserve it. I'm not saying you should trust her or pretend everything's fine. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean giving someone access to hurt you again. It means releasing yourself from the prison of resentment." I turned to face her fully. "What she's done to you is wrong," I said firmly. "Protect yourself. Report her if you need to. Set boundaries, but don't become her. Don't let her cruelty turn you into someone cruel. Because that's what happens when we hold on to anger. It changes us into the very thing we hate." Siobhan's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to be that person again. The person who lashes out. The person who hurts people." "Then don't be," I said simply. "You have a choice every single day. We all do. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there together as darkness fell, watching the lights come on in the houses across the harbor. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for showing me a better way." "You did the hard work yourself," I told her. "I just held the door open." After she left, I sat alone in the gathering dark, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this place. From that terrible Sunday dinner to this cottage by the sea, from anger and hurt to peace and understanding. My husband used to say that life is a circle. What we put out comes back to us, for good or ill. And he was right. Siobhan had hurt me, yes, but her cruelty had led to her transformation. My forgiveness had led to her generosity. And now she was learning to pass that grace forward to someone else. The circle was complete. 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from the hospital administrator. Siobhan had reported the nurse who'd been harassing her, not out of revenge, but with documentation of misconduct that couldn't be ignored. The woman was reprimanded and transferred. Justice was served, but with dignity, without cruelty. Siobhan called me that night, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in months. "I did what you said," she told me. "I protected myself without becoming her. And Claire, it feels like I can breathe again." "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it with my whole heart. Now, as I sit here in my cottage, writing this story down so I won't forget the lessons I've learned, I think about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. I won't leave my children money. Most of that went to this cottage, and I have no regrets. But I hope I've left them something more valuable. A map for navigating hurt, a model of grace under pressure, a reminder that we can choose every single day who we want to be. A wife asked me recently, "Grandma, why did you forgive Ma'am when she was so mean to you?" And I told her the truth. Because holding on to anger would have hurt me more than it hurt her. Because your mother is more than the worst thing she ever did. Because everyone deserves a chance to be better. And because forgiveness isn't weakness, darling. It's the strongest thing we can do. She thought about that for a moment, then hugged me tight. "When I grow up," she whispered, "I want to be like you." And in that moment, I understood that this was the real gift. Not the cottage, not the money repaid, not even the apology. The real gift was knowing that the legacy I was leaving, the lessons of grace and forgiveness and choosing love over bitterness, would outlive me. That somewhere down the line, my granddaughters would face their own moments of hurt, their own terrible Sundays, and they would remember this story. They would remember that their grandmother chose peace over anger, grace over revenge, love over hate, and maybe, just maybe, they would make the same choice. If this story helps one woman open her eyes, if it gives one person the courage to forgive when forgiveness feels impossible, if it reminds even one soul that we can choose who we become, then every bit of it was worth it. The wine stain, the pushed shoulders, the sleepless nights, the hard work of rebuilding trust, all of it. Because in the end, we're all just trying to find our way home. And sometimes, the only path that leads there runs straight through forgiveness. My name is Claire Finnegan. I'm 63 years old, and this is the story I needed to tell. Not because I'm special, but because I'm ordinary. Because if an ordinary woman like me can choose grace over grudges, anyone can. The circle is complete, the scales are balanced, and I am, finally, truly at peace. God bless you all. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you love. Sometimes, one story can change an entire day, or even an entire life. I'll be here, in my cottage by the sea, watching the boats come in and the roses bloom, living proof that it's never too late to start again, that forgiveness can transform everything, that love, in the end, always wins. See you next time, dear ones. May you find your own path to peace.